So we had a pretty big reveal today that gets me fairly excited about the future of these mobile chips. The different chips that we see going into some of these gaming handheld systems, these mini PCs almost. And obviously this is something that the Switch will be moving along with as well, because the entire sector continues to evolve rapidly. And with AMD's announcement today, I am really curious to see what Nvidia can come up with on their side, and we're going to go over all of that here today. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe if you're new here to the SpawnWave Plus channel. So earlier, AMD announced their Ryzen Z1 and Z1 Extreme chips. We already knew that there was a chip coming from them because it was going to be in the Asus ROG Ally. This is something that we heard about in the very early previews of this device, as Dave 2D and a few others got to go hands-on with an engineering sample. But the idea was they were going to build on what we're seeing with the Steamdeck, where the Steamdeck, we had Valve working with AMD to come up with a custom chipset that would work more in line with what's needed from a gaming-centric device rather than try to make basically a mini PC that can do everything. It still can, but they definitely move some sliders around, we'll say, from the hardware side just to try to give you the best possible experience with the current technology. And it looks like AMD has once again done that here, and they released a bunch of slides to go over all of this, as you would kind of expect from AMD. But there are some benchmarks here, and they do that thing where they do kind of puff up the numbers somewhat, so we'll sort of point some of that out as we go along. But AMD Ryzen Z1 series processors, again, they have two of them, the Extreme with 8-core 16 threads, and the base Z1 6-core 12 thread. I believe the base Z1 is what will be in that ROG Ally, and I think that has a lot of that has to do with them still having to be aware of battery life, which that's one of the biggest holdups right now for these systems. There's one other one that we'll touch on, but battery life is a big thing right now. That, I mean, you could see AMD working to really push things with this chip. They show a raw graphics performance of up to 8.6 teraflops. That's getting pretty close to PlayStation 5 territory in terms of raw performance, but as we've mentioned time and time again, there's a bit more to the story than just the overall teraflop number, and teraflops have really become more of a marketing term than ever before. But these are very capable chips and built on the cutting-edge technology from AMD with RDNA 3. It's impressive stuff what they're able to get out of these smaller chips that will run in the 15 watts in some gaming performance and up to 30 watts in turbo mode for that performance. But they did showcase some of the benchmarks that can be expected here. Now, they do mention 1080p upscaled from 720p with RSR. You have to remember, we're probably playing on a smaller screen. Think about the Steamdeck and how that's 800p. I don't really see anyone complain about the resolution on that necessarily when they're just playing it, sitting there, right, with it. I mean, really, what, a foot or two from your face, or on the Switch. The screen resolution just is not something that comes up very often as a big sticking point for people, and realistically, the difference between 720p and 1080p on a screen that small, not a huge deal. But when you blow it up to a TV, then you start to see a bigger difference, especially going from something like, well, 1080p to 4K. That much more noticeable there when you're on a 65-inch screen. So we see the average FPS, low settings, 1080p, that's upscaled 720p with RSR on the Z1 Extreme. And you're seeing Red Dead Redemption 2 up over 70 frames. That caught me by surprise a bit. That's pretty impressive. As we go through these benchmarks, though, I want you to understand something. They are doing these benchmarks. This is, by the way, with the ROG Ally. So that's kind of cool to get an early look at what we could expect from that device, even if you lop off 10% off the top because they're doing this in the most ideal scenarios. That would still be over 60 frames for Red Dead Redemption 2. However, they did mention that this is being recorded using the turbo mode at 30 watts. The Steamdeck runs at half of that, and we still look at like 2 hours generally for some of these more demanding games. So this might legitimately be at less than an hour of battery life. But it was mentioned by Asus that the Ally will, at the same power draw as the Steamdeck, have 50% better performance. So either way, even with the Z1 base running at 15 watts, we should see some pretty good performance compared to that Steam Deck. But looking across the board here, you kind of start to get the idea, I do anyway, why they even have a screen that touches above that 60 hertz refresh rate. It makes sense now, seeing this Forza Horizon 4 over 140 frames per second. Now, things start to come back down to earth a little bit when they start to move around with something like the Ryzen Z1, that being the base chip. Again, this will be obviously the cheaper of the two, and might be the thing that a lot of these companies gravitate towards, because while the chip is an important factor, there's still a lot of other stuff that goes into it. So Red Dead Redemption 2, 41 frames, you cap that at 30, and the idea of just having Red Dead Redemption 2 as a portable game, there are trade-offs, clearly. So that being a big one there is the lower frame rate than if you're just on your PC with your 4090. But still seeing CSGO at 149 frames, Grand Theft Auto 5 at 97 frames, which is still impressive to see that game running on a handheld device. So you might be able to turn up some of the settings rather than low, maybe go to medium, even high, and still get right around 60 frames. So while these would be some of the more graphically demanding games like a Red Dead Redemption 2, there's still a host of other games all over the place on Steam that would probably perform incredibly well on this Z1. Now, we also have just full native HD 1080p performance, as we were looking at upscaled from 720p to 1080p, and this is where things do start to fall apart a bit for these chipsets, and this is the biggest thing that they say they run into outside of battery life, clearly, because there's a limit for how much power they're pulling from it. But when it comes to the chip itself and where its biggest weak point is for running games, it appears to be the memory, and this is something we've been dealing with APUs because they use shared memory. So if you when we had DDR3, back in the day, it wasn't great. DDR4 helped a bit. Now we're up to low power DDR5, 5X, and all of this, but it is still limited. And while we see that teraflop number getting closer to the PS5, you're probably looking at this wondering, well, how come 1080p is trailing behind something like what you'd expect out of the PS5 at high set? Like, you might see something like a Far Cry 6 running on the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series, and it would run much better than this, even at higher settings. And that comes down to just the overall memory bandwidth and what they're able to pull from memory, because of that LPDDR5 being fairly limited compared to what kind of memory bandwidth you get on just flat out video cards, or even these gaming consoles that are set up to take advantage of much more from that. In fact, AMD seems fairly confident of the build of their current chips with the Z1 and the Z1 Extreme, and again, they're outfitted pretty well. Like, these are very capable chips, but until memory in general just gets faster and faster, it will basically be limited overall, especially when it comes to higher resolution, which right now with the smaller screens, it's not as big of a deal. So living in that 720p to 1080p range when you're looking at a screen that's, 8 inches or something, not a huge deal. But when you want to take it and have it be docked and go to a larger display, that's where I think you're going to have those issues with memory overall and the resolution it's able to push out there. The thing that I'm really interested in now is Nvidia's response, because AMD seems to really be muscling their way into this sector. And it makes sense. They do the CPUs, they do the GPUs, and they build out these all-in-one chips. But we know Nvidia and Nintendo have this partnership that's going to be ongoing. We know they're building out their next chipset. Is this something we can look at and get some sort of idea as to how much headroom there is for a chip with the next Nintendo system in mind? I kind of think so, and I've been wondering what they'd be able to come up with. And looking at the Z1, while they're not going to push the same kind of power draw as the Z1 is, even at 15 watts, because they're probably going to want to come in at less than 10 watts, so they at least have some decent battery life. I still think you could see them with some tricks and different things Nvidia would be able to do, especially on the efficiency side and the upscaling side, probably coming in right alongside that Z1, just with better battery life. And really, look at the Switch bar. It's so funny to see them put that there, because yes, the Switch has aged quite a bit. It's using a chip from 2015, but think about that for a minute. 2015 wasn't that long ago for the kind of jump we're seeing here with what AMD is presenting with these Z1 chipsets. So the mobile space with these chips is just accelerating at a rapid pace. And you know what? It's exciting to see. But let me know what you guys think about all this down below, with AMD showing up with their new Ryzen Z1 series processors. We will hear more about that Asus ROG Ally. I'll talk about it tomorrow, actually, in Newswave, because we got quite a bit of information there as well, and even when we can look forward to a new showcase from them. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.